So in addition to not being able to afford it when I moved over here, I figured, if I didn't have an irrigation system installed, not only would that save me a lot of money, it would also save my sanity, because I would just be absolutely petrified if I awakened at 4 o'clock in the morning in the summertime with the irrigation going and thinking, how much is that costing me?
Welcome back to the Beet Podcast. Today we are talking something that is on a lot of people's minds, which is how to actually capture rainwater and use it in your garden to your benefit. And actually we have somebody who knows a thing or two about it. They live in Tucson, Arizona, so they actually do have the need and desire to capture as much rainwater as possible, and that is Martha Retallick. And she actually wrote a really interesting book all about Water Harvesting 101. It's an ebook that's available that I went through, and I found it to be a very complete, fantastic introduction to this topic. So thank you for coming on. And I do want to hit you with a question that I get all the time whenever we talk about rain capture, which is whether it is legal to capture rainwater.
Well, here in Tucson, it is not only legal, it is encouraged, to the point where you can get a rebate from the city for installing rainwater harvesting features.
That's amazing. And
I love rebates. I've gotten them for my cistern. I have a 1,500-gallon cistern, which right now, thanks to the rain that we had, even with our lousy monsoon season, which wasn't that productive, and it was supposed to be, I'm up to about, I'm just under 1,300 gallons, and this is a 1,500-gallon tank. We're going into the fall, and it cools off. Theoretically, we could get more rain from Pacific storms, although I have not heard a long-term forecast that says we're going to have above average, below average, or just average rainfall. But I'm prioritizing the cistern water to my raised bed gardens. I have two of them. I have about 30 square foot of garden space. I haven't planted anything for fall, winter yet. I tried this past summer. It was like the garden of epic fail. Tomatoes, fail. Hot pepper, fail. Okra, fail. Number one, it was just too hot for the seeds to sprout. And for another thing, starting on tax day of this year, I started being visited by a neon green tropical lizard. I have no idea where this thing came from, but it really took a liking to my garden.
Oh.
Well, it disappeared in August, so I thought, you know what? Summer garden fail. I'm going to let that couple of raised bed gardens lay fallow. And then after a few weeks, I thought there is nothing sadder than empty raised bed gardens, so I planted tepary beans in them to act as nitrogen fixers. And here's the thing about teparies. They thrive on being neglected.
Yes.
You don't have to water them every day, but I have been doing them to get the vines well established. They're starting to flower, which means they're soon to start producing beans. And I'll have a nice nitrogen fixing project going there. I'm going to just let them stay there until they curl up and die, which will probably be happening in November and December with the frost. And then I'll start seeding the fall, winter around them.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's so... in these very hot climate zones like where you are in Arizona, the summer season just sounds very challenging.
It is.
Getting your timing right for like a successful fall into spring also seems like you really have to be paying attention to the weather and what's happening in order to get something successful going. And actually, tepary beans, I have grown a few times, and I think I usually give them a little bit too much love, because when I ignore them, they tend to do their best. And when I try to actually water them and get them to be more productive, they tend to die on me. So if you don't know, for anyone listening, tepary beans are a very hot tolerant bean, a very tiny, mighty bean that produces a delicious broth as well. I found it to be a very tasty one, and one that is really fun to grow if you are in a drought and hot climate kind of region. Speaking of the legality, here in San Diego, similar story. We do have rain barrel rebates and things like that. And actually some of our coastal cities like Imperial Beach recently made some sort of like declaration, basically encouraging every single person in the city to get rain barrels, because one of the interesting things about it is, I think this is actually what brought you into rainwater harvesting, is flooding. And so when the city gets its rainfall and there's storm surge and the water levels are rising, it's actually really hard for the city to get rid of all that extra water by just dumping it back into the like sewer lines, and it ends up back flooding and causing all sorts of issues. So they've actually encouraged capture to solve one of those major issues. And I know you are familiar.
Well, here in Tucson, we do not have storm sewers. When it rains, and it really rains, the water runs into the street, and that can create flooding issues. So what the city is really pushing now, and we're applying for grants to do it in my neighborhood, called green stormwater infrastructure. In other words, putting water harvesting basins along the edges of streets, and sometimes they bump out a little into the streets, or they're in a traffic circle. And what these do is capture flowing rain, and once you capture it, you let it sink into the ground, and on the way down to the ground, it nourishes plant life. And in some of these basins, there are trees and shrubs planted. In other basins, no, but the plant life is nearby, and it can stretch its roots over to that water source and be nourished.
That's amazing, because I actually never even thought about the fact that you wouldn't have stormwater drains or anything like that. I just, living here my whole life, I just assume that ours don't work that well, even though it doesn't rain that much, but it is something that I'm familiar with. So that's actually a really interesting thing to think about, and being able to just capture that passively. Now, at the beginning of the book, you talk about how water sort of differs in the wild versus in a cityscape. And one of the things I thought was really interesting is like the numbers are basically inverse of each other, right?
A lot of our water in the city becomes runoff, as opposed to in the natural landscape, runoff isn't really an issue. There is no structure out there to be endangered by a flood. Right. In the city, different story. So what we want to do is, first of all, water harvesting activity number one, redirect rainwater away from where you don't want it to where you do. In other words, at my place, I had berms, basins, and swales built to direct the water away from my house so it doesn't come in here and cause a flood, and previous owners did have that problem. Instead, it goes out to basins in my yard where it nourishes the plant life, and those basins, my one water harvesting basin that's directly connected to the swale filled up halfway this past weekend. Now, one of the things you need to remember with any water harvesting project is allow for overflow. So there's an overflow basin. It didn't overflow on Saturday, but it did come close. And the second activity of water harvesting is you want to store rainwater for later use, and that's what everybody tends to associate water harvesting with, putting that water in a cistern. So my cistern, ready for use this fall, and I'm going to prioritize the 2 raised beds because I don't use the cistern water for watering the landscape. Most of my landscape is what's called drought tolerant, so it lives off of rainwater.
That's cool. And actually, the thing that, of course, that plays into this is that if you're in a cityscape, you tend to have everything being paved over, concrete, asphalt, buildings. And so when the water comes, it's still hitting the same amount of area, but there's nowhere for it to go. And so when you're looking at the wild, you have plants and roots and these natural little dry riverbeds and playas that could actually capture all this water and the rocks. And that's an interesting thing to think about. When you do think of water harvesting, I am almost immediately and only thinking about rain barrels. But actually slowing and allowing that water to infiltrate into your home, like your yard and your garden and your landscape, is actually really great as well, because you can't capture every single drop that comes down in most cases. Otherwise, you'd have probably rain barrels the size of your house. And B, it also helps give you plenty of benefits. Like you mentioned, you don't have to actually water most of your landscape. They are arid plants. And of course, by allowing that water to capture and infiltrate your soil, those plants are also able to be more resilient because they have that sort of water reserve. So that's really cool to actually combine this discussion into that sort of package, basically.
And the thing is, I have two ironwood trees and a mesquite tree, and those trees made it through the drought that we had pretty well. We had a drought that started in August of 2024, and late August, September of this year, it appears to be waning. I'm not saying drought's over, but appears to be waning. We've had some rain. Those trees did really well. Now, I've had some die off in some of my shrubbery, and there were some things I had to remove, and there are some things I'm having to trim out the dead stuff. But overall, my plant life did pretty well.
A neat thing about it is that it's probably also encouraging those roots to go deep and into those areas where the water is infiltrating. So I'm sure they have like a better access to that than otherwise would be available to most of the other plants that are going to have to probably rely on things like irrigation. So you mentioned that you basically started this idea of capturing and harvesting rainwater because you had to, right? Like your house was flooding. And so how did you start that process of actually looking at, like, if somebody walks into their backyard and they realize they have this issue, where do you kind of first start thinking about this problem?
I started thinking out before I moved in here. The home inspector told me that the backyard sloped toward the house and it needed to be regraded. And after I moved in, the ever-efficient neighborhood grapevine told me that during heavy storms my house would flood. And when I started remodeling the place, I did find evidence of that in the furnace room. So I had a problem I needed to solve. So I started digging a swale in the backyard. Did it incorrectly. It was a swale that made a sharp turn because it was supposed to divert the water to the front yard, and that never happened. So I got help from a local organization that offered service learning workshops. And over the course of 6 workshops, they regraded my yard. They installed rainwater harvesting cistern. They also installed something called laundry to landscape gray water harvesting system, which is the third activity of water harvesting, recycling used water. So on laundry day, I water my fruit trees.
Yeah, that's actually a really cool thing. Kevin at Epic Gardening has a laundry sort of gray water system too, where one thing I didn't realize is that the washing machine actually has a pump. So it is actually pushing the water out, which means that you could kind of direct it in a more unique kind of different way. And that's actually been passively irrigating this side of his house where he has like some ornamental stuff and like an artichoke patch that has done really well ever since that's been added.
I'm watering lemon, pomegranate, and fig.
Nice. Yeah, and those are, the fig will probably take as much water as you give it. So that's
Yes.
nice. That could be like your sponge.
Unfortunately, the fig outgrew its container and it's no longer producing, so the container is rusting out. I'm about to replace that. And the fig I'm going to replace with a dwarf called Fignominal that only grows to 3 foot by 3 foot, and
That's nice.
ordering a new planter for it. So I'm staying in the fig production game, but sorry, big fig in the back, you gotta go. If you're not producing anymore, I'm thinking agriculturally, you can't live here anymore.
That's a fair thing. I mean, it is a limited amount of space and we all have to choose our investments and basically got to do something for me if you're going to be in my yard. And there's a lot of things they can do, but one of them should be food production in mind. So then when we're thinking of like the actual process of water harvesting, you kind of break it down into 2 categories, right? There's the passive and I guess like the active. How would you sort of explain those two?
Okay, passive water harvesting is where you're sculpting the yard. Like in my front yard, I have a swale that goes right below the downspout, and that directs water down into the first of my big water harvesting basins. And as I mentioned before, you go out a plan for overflow, so it's connected to a second basin for overflow. And then at the south edge of my yard, it's like an earthen dam. It's a berm that acts as a big hug to keep the water on my property and out of the street where it could join with all those other water molecules, get into trouble, and cause floods. Well, that's passive water harvesting. Most of the time it just sits there, it blends in with the landscape. Active water harvesting features are very noticeable. Cisterns, gray water harvesting systems, they stand out. And they require human intervention in order to work. Like, I have to do the laundry in order for this water to get into the gray water harvesting system and the irrigation system it's attached to get out to the plants. And of course, with the cistern, it needs downspout, it needs gutters, it needs plumbing, and then of course there's a tank that needs to be installed. And then, well, you walk up to this thing, there's water in it. How do you get the water out? Well, I have to open its little faucet and connect. I use a short hose, a laundry supply hose, to get the water into a watering can. So there's a lot of human technology involved on the active water harvesting side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's sort of, I don't know, dissuaded me, I guess, in the concept of active water harvesting is that it is an investment in some way. And it's kind of an investment that is a little bit harder to swallow simply because to have like a big enough tank for me would cost hundreds of dollars, maybe up to like $1,000. And then we do get rebates and they will help. But I'm actually starting to think more about, especially after going through the book, thinking more about some passive water capture, because until I do decide to bite the bullet and install the cistern, which, just to be clear, there's many benefits to having that anyway, regardless of just saving on your money. But the passive systems to me seem really interesting because I don't have to really think about them as much. I could just kind of set them up and think about where I have problems with my rainwater. For example, even where the water comes down right next to my house, it tends to really sit up against it. And I'd really rather it not do that. So I'm thinking about probably building a sort of berm with a sort of wood chip basin swale system that I could plant around, maybe some like wet tolerant native plants. And the goal there is basically to just not worry about it. So I think I like the idea of setting up like these sort of dry rock streams that you showed. And I'm guessing, what's been your experience with kind of finding native plants that suit this purpose? Because there must be desert plants that also kind of rely on this kind of flood and dry period system, especially where you are.
Well, I have around my basins in the front yard, not in them, but near them. I have a mesquite tree. I have a tuberosa shrub. And kind of hanging off in the distance there a little bit, cactus. Oh. And I'm getting more desert hackberry planted this fall. I'm going to plant an Arizona rosewood out there. And I've also I have what in my backyard I call Martha's tiny tree farm. I have these 2 ironwoods that drop their pods on the driveway, and so I've been picking up the pods and planting them in pots. And I have quite a little bit of growth back there, little tiny trees growing up. And say about mid-October, I'm going to plant those in the front yard. I think I'm going to make a little ironwood grove out there. So more trees near the basins. And the thing is about plants near basins is they figure out that there's water nearby. They extend their roots to it.
Yeah, so you're not, in most cases, I guess you probably don't get enough rain that you could get away with planting something that truly wants wet soil all the time in the basin. So then the strategy instead is to kind of plant around it and let that kind of infiltrate and let the roots come to it as needed, right?
What they say in this part of the world is our native plants do not like to get their feet wet. These are not cypress like you see in the swamps in Louisiana and Mississippi. Right. They don't mind being near a basin or near a slope and near some sort of raised berm where water flows off of it. And one thing I like to tell people is if you want to see a berm in action, go for a drive on I-10. I-10 in this part of the world is raised up. And the reason for that is to avoid the flooding. But what happens is when the rain comes, it flows down the sides on either side of the interstate. And you'll notice near the interstate there's a lot of lush plant life. Well, those plants are taking advantage of the berm called I-10.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. It's something I always notice, just even driving through the driest periods, you'll generally see some sort of vibrant green stuff next to the freeway just because of its ability to, it's an asphalt road. It's going to shed water to the edges, and that's where all the plants are going to really want to set up shop, essentially. And actually, one of the cool things is that for this system of creating these berms and swales and water capture is it's not just something for people in a arid climate, whether it's like Tucson or San Diego, but you could also be planting what I've seen people call like rain gardens, where you get constant rain and wetness in your yard, and you can put very, very water thirsty plants that are okay with having wet roots, essentially wet feet all the time, and use that to your advantage to just stop different parts of your yard from flooding. So even if you are in a wet region, this is something that the passive actually part of it is probably the most intriguing to you, and you're probably not thinking about capturing it. Instead, you're trying to think of diverting it and making use of it when it is there all the time. So that's just like another little thing I wanted to point out for anyone listening, thinking that this is just for people in the desert.
Well, in our part of the world, a rain garden is something that lives off of infrequent rainfall. Where there's more frequent rainfall, yeah, sure, then put things where you're going to get a lot of rain, like, off a roof or right next to a downspout, and make that your rain garden. Here in the desert, we can't depend on very frequent rainfall, so we have to make do with what we get.
Yeah, and actually, this is one of the interesting things that is different about our climate. Well, there's a lot of things different about our climate, of course, but one of the things that has been a struggle for me is that all of my rain comes in the winter. So we're talking like November, maybe into April, but most of it is truly in the winter periods. And that is a time where I am not growing a lot of very like water. It's not hot. It's not evaporating. There's plenty of water for all the plants in the ground. So any of that water I capture, I'm essentially trying to hold on to until I get out until June.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. All right. Because you're actually in a similar thing. You can't really grow in the summer because it's too hot, but that is when you get your monsoon rains. And so on that note, is it totally fine to just capture this rainwater and leave it in the barrel for months at a time? Have you ever had an issue with that?
I have. Here's what happened. I had my roof replaced a couple of years ago, and part of that process was to hose off the old roof. And it was a white-coated roof, and I forgot to tell the guy, would you please cover the rain head for the cistern? And so that milky white water flowed in there, elastomeric coating, so I couldn't use my cistern for several weeks to water plants. All I could do was just drain it out into, sort of near the landscape plants and hope they'd be okay, and they were. Then I started using the cistern water again, and that stuff stunk. You know what? The cure to it was time and more rainwater. The winter of 2023-24 was quite wet. My cistern filled up several times. Problem solved. Okay, then we started having a drought last August of 24, and then in June, the remnants of Hurricane Alvin came our way. Yippee! Rain! And then we didn't get any more until July, and by the time July rolled around, my cistern reeked. I kept using the water to water the plants anyway, and I was very careful about washing everything off in case I harvested anything. And I even reached out to a local consultant, hey, does my cistern need to be pumped out and cleaned? And then we started getting monsoon storms, and the smell went away. Right now, my cistern, it just smells like a pond.
Interesting. So is that mostly, you think, from the heat then?
What we thought happened was that good old Alvin left us some rain, and that blended with what was already in the tank. We had a hot June, the tank heated up, and ugh. However, I did not have algae in there, and that's another common cause of smelly cisterns, is you have an algae growth. The solution to that is to pour a gallon of bleach in there. Don't water your plants. Just let that bleach work, kill off the algae. In a week or two, check your tank. When it stops smelling like a swimming pool, then start reintroducing it to your plants.
Okay.
Monitor them carefully, but you want to get rid of that swimming pool smell before you start using your cistern water again. And yeah, you'll have dead algae in there, but hey, that's organic fertilizer for the plants.
Yeah, that's true. I guess you do get some of that breakdown, and I'm sure that's giving something to them. Okay, so in that case, if I do think of capture, then I just have to be, it's a little bit more work, I guess, than like something like the passive, right? Because there's a little bit of maintenance, there's some installation, and then there's the moving the water around, like the watering can. But I think like outside of the benefit of, it's hard for it to pay off. I mean, water costs are going up, so that I guess will help. But the other benefit to it that I think about is the fact that during a drought or water restriction or anything like that, then you do have some of that water to fall back on. And that's like one of these things that is on my mind on the horizon. If we do get a dry year, it would be great to have that insurance policy of having a big old cistern full of water that I could use. But one of the other things that I think is understated, and I'm glad that you mention it in your book, is all of the sort of tertiary benefits that you get from doing the passive and active water collection. Because I'm sure your yard from where it was before to where it is now has transformed. And a lot of that is probably due to the passive water harvesting, right?
Well, when I moved in here, there was no plant life at all. There was crushed rock in the front yard. Well, there was invasive Bermuda grass in the backyard, which I hired a local fellow who was a landscaper to get rid of that, and he did. But anything you see here that's been planted was done by me and by others. And I'm a nature photographer, so I exploit the plant life mercilessly. I get out there and take pictures of it. And as I've had more plant life growing here, place has become quite the hangout for the local birds.
Oh, very nice.
So that mesquite tree out in the front yard in the springtime, it's like a singles club for birds.
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of really cool birds out there, like the desert cardinal, and I think you guys also get the cardinals. I've actually been birding out in that area down in Patagonia, just south of you, and it's really fun, beautiful landscape. I have always loved the desert landscape, and I've thought it would be fun to have a really thriving garden like that. And actually, having that garden set up has also probably cooled your yard substantially.
Yes, I changed the climate at my house.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, in Tucson, like that's a benefit that I think anyone can feel pretty quickly, right? Because your yard is cooler and your house is probably cooler.
Yes, well, when I was growing up, I was born and raised in Pennsylvania, and one of the houses we lived in, it was the second house my parents built, my father told the builder to save the trees. This was in the woods. And we were kind of an outlier in our neighborhood because just about everybody else wanted the trees cut down so they could have a lawn. Well, guess whose father didn't want to mow grass, and guess who also didn't want to mow grass? My mother and I. So we kept the trees, and I noticed when I would go over and play at my neighbors' houses and then walk home, it was hot, hot, hot. And then I got into our place, and it was nice and cool because of all those big trees, and got in the house, and it made quite a difference. And that stayed with me when I moved out here. First thing I decided to do is I'm going to channel my Pennsylvania self. I want trees.
It is actually amazing how much they can change even just the immediate area around them. I have these really quite mature mulberry trees, and one of the things that those trees do is they actually actively weep water. And sometimes just laying on the hammock underneath it, I'll occasionally feel little sprinkles of water. And it just feels like the only place I want to be in the summertime when it's hot. It's shady, it's cooler, it's not oppressive. It's really where everyone in the house goes in the summertime. And the hammock becomes quite popular and a competition for who gets to sit in it first. So there's definitely a crazy added benefit to that. And the cool thing is that if you set up your passive systems right, you could kind of put that on autopilot to develop in the background. But one of the things that you also caveat is like, this isn't like an overnight thing. You're not setting up a rain capture system and all of a sudden it's like full of thriving plants, right? So how did that transformation look for you? What was that kind of timeline?
Well, what happened with mesquite tree, I got that in January of 2005 from Trees for Tucson. And it was about as tall as I am. And now, in other words, it was one Martha high, about 5 feet. Now it's about 25 feet high. I periodically have to get it trimmed back so it doesn't go caressing the roof, because that's not good for the roof. The ironwoods, I bought those in 2006 from a local plant nursery, which is like a sheltered workshop called Desert Survivors, and I brought them home on my bicycle. And they sat there and sat there and sat there for 3 years. And then in 2009, they got the memo, and they started shooting up. They're now about 25 feet high. So in the beginning, it's going to take a lot of patience. You're going to have this sun-beaten yard, and you're going to be looking at these little plants and wondering if these things ever grow. Don't do like I did and plant so many that they start crowding each other out. I had 2 mesquite trees. one of them was crowded out by the other, so the little crowded out one had to have that cut down in 2009. The one that remains has really taken off.
I guess it's like the first couple of years, a lot of people don't realize that trees are really focusing on their roots, especially in like a intense climate. And so they might look like they're not doing much, but then like you said, it was probably pretty interesting to see that turning point, and then all of a sudden the tree is just shooting up. And that's when like the magic starts to happen, because then you start to get some shade. You could work around that and plant other things that are maybe a little bit more sensitive, and you could really start to fill out your space. But I guess the best time to plant a tree or to start water harvesting is today or yesterday, I guess the saying goes. And the other best time is today. So I am in that line of thought. I have like 3 or 4 different rain gutters that come off my house. And this year, my goal is to set up some of that capture, because it is like this last year was tremendous, terrible drought for us. We got 4 inches of rain. On average, we're supposed to get like 10. It's like in the 10 to 12 range. And so 4 inches was pretty brutal, because one of the things that I've really started to appreciate about rain and capturing it and kind of distributing it is that I don't water my entire yard. I have drip irrigation that it's exactly where my plants are. And so anything on the periphery of that is going to end up getting very dry. And that's also going to end up sucking more water out of my active garden area. So I've been thinking about like how to direct some of that extra rainwater kind of to the edges of where my garden is to help saturate that soil and stop it from getting so dry that it pulls all the moisture out of my garden. So like there's a couple different ways, I guess, to think about and use this rain capture idea, and harvesting it is a fantastic way. When you think about sort of in the desert Southwest, I think you broke down kind of like 3 different zones within your yard, right? So can you explain a little bit about, like, I think one of them was the oasis, and then you kind of step out of that?
Yeah, the oasis is where you have the things that really need the water. In other words, how far do you care to carry a watering can? That's where you put the high water use plants.
Okay.
And then you have a transitional zone where the ones that need occasional water. And then at the edge of the yard, that's the arid zone. That's where you put your desert plants like your cactus, or those low water use trees that don't really need a lot of water, like the ironwood.
Right. So you're kind of like stair-stepping away from your home, essentially, as the water infiltration kind of decreases out. Because your main goal here is to make sure that none of that water essentially hits the street and becomes runoff. So on the edges is, like you were saying, sort of away from your basin is where you'd put your cactus that doesn't really want wet feet at all. And you can kind of make use of that sort of difference in how you capture and harvest that water.
And the thing is also here is I don't have any sort of irrigation system, because when I first moved in here, I couldn't afford one.
Yeah.
So hence the rain garden idea where, guys, you got to live off the rainwater. I can't afford to water you.
Yeah,
and they
absolutely.
did.
And I think the overflow thing is another interesting thing, because if you did get a lot of rain, your cistern would probably fill up pretty quickly in one of those like intense flooding days. So what do you do with the extra water once your cistern entirely fills up?
The cistern has an overflow basin in my backyard. And I noticed this past weekend, I have feathery senna shrubs in the backyard, and I threw the pods for those and decided, okay, you be the mulch for that basin, because you want to have mulch basins to keep the water infiltrating slowly into the ground. And I noticed that I have some senna sprouts out back, and I'm, okay, you think you can grow in a basin? Well, let's see how that works. I'm just going to let them grow. Little experiment.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, why not? And
I'll have a senna shrub in the basin.
That'd be pretty cool if it works out, actually. And then, so is that cistern overflow? It's its own dedicated basin, or do you have like everything tied in some way?
It has a dedicated basin.
Okay.
Which hasn't overflowed yet. I hope it never does. But
right.
this concept of overflow is making me think, maybe someday I could connect a second cistern. Maybe, just maybe. We'll see about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so at Kevin's house, he set up a rain capture system off his roof that goes to a 5,000 gallon cistern. And then the smaller buildings like a shed, or there's like a little front part of his house that wasn't like a sloped portion separate from the flat roof, those go to separate rain barrels. And then the way that that system was designed wasn't by us, it was by a local water capture expert, I think catching H2O. And she set it up so that so first of all, we have like the citrus hedge, like these multiple citrus hedges that he planted, and they have mulched basins. And the shower water will passively go down and fill those basins. And that works pretty well. The citrus trees look fantastic. There's a couple pomegranates, an apple, and a peach now as well. But anytime that cistern overflows, it's also tied into those mulch basins. So then it could actually just flow directly out into them as well. So it's actually been really neat to see that grow, because it's insane how productive the citrus trees are. And it also just has reduced the amount of work in maintaining them, because now it has this rich sort of soil and also the wood chips have the benefit of breaking down over time.
They do.
Acting as like a host for fungal stuff, fungal life, and other insects. And so that's actually been feeding the garden as well. And so you're getting a lot of benefits off of the exact same system. And it's really a beautiful thing. And I think probably most people can find a way to use infiltration in some way in their yard.
Well, the thing about mulch is trees also produce mulch.
Yeah.
Mesquites drop leaves, ironwoods drop leaves, my pomegranate trees drop leaves, and so does the fig. Now, I have a Meyer lemon back there. Lemons are not leaf droppers unless there's something terribly wrong with your tree.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good one. And then, yeah, the citrus trees are fantastic for that because they're adding tons of mulch that builds up over time. I am curious about, so we talked a little about the capturing actively, passively, and we've touched on gray water a little bit, but I noticed you also discussed black water. Can you tell us a little bit about what gray water and black water are and which one's the good one?
Okay, gray water is water that would be coming from, well, like at this place, the dishwasher is named Martha. I wash my dishes by hand. And I use a soap called Oasis, which is water harvesting friendly. I wash the dishes in a little bucket and then take the bucket out to the plants that could use a drink. And also the water that comes out of the washing machine is gray water, as long as you're not doing, let's just call it a diaper wash. That would be considered black water, like your toilet water. Let that go down the drain and into the sewer.
Yeah, it's basically not worth messing with it, right? Because it's already by default going to have probably some level of pathogen, and you don't want to have to be capturing water to sanitize it. You want to actually capture the water to use it and not have to worry about things like that.
Flush that black water away. You don't want to be messing with that.
Yeah, and actually, it is interesting you bring up like the soaps. I have an outdoor sink that right now is hooked up to a very, very, very basic active system because it involves 5-gallon buckets that sit underneath it that then I have to actively pick up and carry around and dump in my garden.
Up your body workout.
Yeah, exactly. You get a nice little ab workout when you're trying to tip that barrel into somewhere. And we use, I think that, the Dr. Bronner soap is another one that I think is considered safe by pretty much everyone to use in the landscape. And then, for the washing machine at Kevin's house, he also uses that product you mentioned, Oasis, for his laundry. So that's a really cool kind of thing that I think people worry about is that the soaps can cause issues. And I think like high-level detergents absolutely could cause issues, but you just have to use the right thing in the right place. One of the things that I think is very interesting about this whole thing is how that idea of like the quality of life and money saving. Have you ever found that, I mean, for you, actually stopping flooding from your home is going to save money for sure. But have you found like any money savings in watering, or would you just choose to not have a garden in the same way if you didn't have these kind of water capture systems?
Well, as I said before, I could not afford to have irrigation installed. Where I lived before, where I was renting, the landlady had quite a fruit garden. And she would run hoses out to those trees and turn on the water for hours. Well, the faucet was on my side of the duplex, so I got to listen to it, and it just drove me crazy. So, in addition to not being able to afford it when I moved over here, I figured, if I didn't have an irrigation system installed, not only would that save me a lot of money, it would also save my sanity, because I would just be absolutely petrified if I awakened at 4 o'clock in the morning in the summertime with the irrigation going and thinking, how much is that costing me? So I keep my water bill pretty low. Now, this is not to say that it doesn't go up in the summertime. And here in Tucson, the water bill also includes your sewer, your trash, and your recycle. And for some reason, all those things just keep going up.
Yeah, I think the city of San Diego right now is increasing the water rates by I think something like 60% over the next couple years. So it's about to get more expensive to have a garden, and really thinking about ways to reduce, not just to reduce the water use to save money, but also for the fact that we do live in an arid climate, and bringing water here is an active thing. Like, the water isn't just already here in San Diego. It comes from the Colorado River in many cases, a good chunk of our water. Yeah, so it's like we're all depending on each other to not use all that water to make sure that we can all get that water. So any opportunity to actually capture the free water coming down from the sky or reduce the water use in the garden is not just beneficial to me as like a personal person who doesn't want to spend more money, but it's also just beneficial to everyone in the community that relies on that water. So I think that's one of the things that I am trying to remind myself, is that while it won't immediately put cash in my hand, it will in the long term absolutely help me and everyone around me. And it's a worthwhile investment. I think it absolutely is.
Well, the thing is that we say here is that if you're capturing water in your yard with these basins, well, that water is going to slow down, spread out, and sink into the ground. And on the way down to the water table, it's nourishing plants via the roots as it goes down to the water table. So basically, we're feeding plants and replenishing our water table, which is coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's coming back, which means that now you actually have a source of water for your actual city and place you live that can be used as groundwater. And also, it's, I'm sure, actively helping cool and make the environment more friendly and palatable to humans in general. Because if you had zero plants and it was just a city, it would probably get pretty brutal pretty quick. So there's just so many weird benefits that people don't really think about that go beyond just yourself, and also just to reduce the amount of flooding that happens in your neighborhood. Like I mentioned, there's many cities here on the coastal side that can flood from even what wouldn't be considered a hard rain, but here would be. Like getting 2 inches in a day for us can really cause a lot of havoc on many of our systems, and just having more infiltration, more capture is going to just help everyone. Now, one of the things you mentioned was like those kind of ways that the city has been planting things to help capture the water. And I'm happy to say that I've been seeing a lot more of that around here as well. And it's just fantastic. Even in like shopping centers I've been to recently, I pull up and I park and I notice that the parking lot is like up here, and then there's like a deep basin right in between where the 2 cars are parked. And now they've put up signs that people can learn about it. That way, all the water is infiltrating down into these basins where they plant all sorts of things that can handle all of that moisture. And it's just cool to see that happening on a larger scale, and for people to really think about it. Because, I mean, let's just face it, like, water is finite in some ways, and also it is going to get more expensive. And everybody likes plants. So why not get more plants, capture more water, infiltrate our soil, and make everyone better off, instead of just allowing it to essentially create pollution by washing down the roads and carrying all the chemicals into the watershed and damaging property and animals and plants and everything in between. So I'm all in on passive water harvesting for sure, and active actually as well. But I think everybody can have some sort of principle for passive water savings. A lot of cases, it doesn't require much. Like a shovel gets you pretty far in terms of berms and basins. And then you can always get wood chips for free through like arborist drops, or even sometimes local, like sort of municipality, like compost is often free. In our city, it is at least. And so you can get like these organic materials and a shovel and dirt and really start thinking about and building these simple, cheap, effective ways to harvest water in your yard.
And the thing is, once you get started, you think of more things that you can do. And I've been doing this for 20 some years, 21 years. I haven't run out of things to do yet.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I've started to really fill out my garden. I'm running out of space there, but now I'm like, oh, well, now I could actually start thinking about all these different ways of working on the water harvesting and capture. So that'll keep me occupied, I think, for at least a couple winters as I dial it in. Because of course, one of the things that goes into this is that you learn, do you have enough overflow capacity? Do you have enough capture and direction? One year it might rain really hard and might cause some new problems that we weren't even ready to think about. So yeah, it's absolutely a never-ending process. But it's been really fun chatting to you about this. And actually, I feel more inspired to set up some more water capture. And I think people at home listening, if you are curious, definitely check out this book, Water Harvesting 101, because it's so approachable. It's given me way more confidence to think and just kind of dive into it. I realize that I've maybe been overcomplicating it in my head. And anyone could get started with, like I said, a shovel and maybe some rocks or maybe some wood chips.
But the important thing is to start.
Yeah.
You don't have to start perfectly. You may change things along the way, but just to start. See
Absolutely.
what works.
Thank you, Martha. And I hope you have a good rest of the day. And hopefully everyone at home will start capturing a little bit of rain on their own as well.